time, which I thought was going to be a one-time thing, but as I was preparing for that and then shortly thereafter, really felt that something else was going on and that this was not meant to be a one-time thing. It was supposed to be the start of something else. So kind of out of the blue, I kind of hit me that I was supposed to go back to school and get some sort of biblical degree, which at the time was crazy because why would I at 39 years old with 2 years away from sending my own kids to school, go back to school myself? But it felt like it was something I was supposed to do. So, and I talked it a couple different times here already of some of the things that fell into place that really convinced me that yes, this is what I was supposed to be doing. So in October, I enrolled in Christian Leaders College, which is an online school based down in Florida. I've completed 4 classes so far and should graduate by the end of next year. After that, I have no idea why I'm on this journey or what's next, but we'll find out, I guess, when we get there. So now for the students out there that I have bugged about your grades at one point or another, I want to be an open book here. So I've completed 4 classes. I have 1A and 3A minuses, so things are going well. The frustrating part of that is most of the classes are out of 200 points. So to get an A is 95%. So it's 190 out of the 200 points. 2 of my 3A minuses are because I had 189 out of 200 points. So I was 1 point away from having an A in both classes. But anyhow, so before we start looking forward at taking a step of faith, let's go back a year almost to Friday, March 13th, 2020. It was a Friday the 13th. Anybody remember what happened that day? Yes. That was the day Governor Wolf announced he was shutting down the state for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, if you remember the terminology. Of course, it turned into a much bigger, we'll call it an adventure since then. And like I have up here, even Disney World closed. Like, Florida gets hit with a hurricane, Disney World will close for a day, and then they reopen the day after the hurricane. But so that just shows you how big of a deal this has become. But despite all the different negatives that happened, there were some positives. Dave has spent all year talking to us about creating some breathing room, which is taking some space in our life to dedicate some time to God. From the perspective of breathing room, 2020 should have been the best year ever. We suddenly had all kinds of time to do things. There were no church activities, no running kids to sports, no going out to eat, some would say no fun, etc. So think of all the different things that you didn't have time to do before. You didn't have time to spend more quality time with your kids. Well, I've seen some of your Facebook posts. You now have the time, and all they do is drive you crazy. You didn't have time to go to the gym. Well, okay, the gyms were closed. I'll give you that one. But how many of you started a home workout? That's a facetious question. You're not supposed to raise your hand. Show off. Good job. Good job. You didn't have time to read the Bible every day. Life slowed down enough. You could post on Facebook 14 times a day you were bored and had nothing to do. But did you have time to pick up the Bible and read it? You didn't have time to pray unless it was a quick prayer before a meal. Let's face it, during quarantine, our excuses of being too busy were gone. So my question is, have you done the things you were too busy for before, or did you just find another excuse not to? Another way to look at this is if you can't find the time now while life is slower to do these things, how do you expect to find the time when life gets back to normal and gets busy again? So if you've sat there and taken in David's advice over the last couple weeks about slowing down and creating breathing room, how then do we move forward with whatever step of faith God is asking us to take? So let's look at 2 examples in the Bible where a step of faith was required. About a month ago, in one of his sermons, Dave talked about the story of Peter walking on the water. And so I want to revisit that today. So if you remember, this takes place in the middle of a terrible storm. As long as Peter stays focused on Jesus, he's able to walk on the water. As soon as he gets distracted by all the mayhem around him, he starts to sink. So before we read the story, let's set the stage here. Jesus has just fed the 5,000 and tells the disciples to board the boat and head across the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum. Jesus stays behind to pray. I wonder if maybe he needed some breathing room from the disciples. So we pick up the story in Matthew 14, verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why do you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. Now, we don't know if Peter knew how to swim or not, but given his fear of sinking, I think we can safely assume he did not. So did Peter fail because he started to worry and began to sink? Some have criticized Peter for just that, but I have a question for you. How much faith did Peter have to take the first step? You see, for me, walking on water is the easy part. The hardest part is the first step to get out of the boat. The Sea of Galilee at its deepest is about 140 feet deep. This boat is in the middle of a bad storm, so remember verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land. For a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. Now, if you're in a boat, caught in a bad storm, big waves all around you, and you don't know how to swim, is your first thought going to be to get out of the boat, to walk on the water? Peter did not fail in this story, even though he started to sink. He, in fact, is the hero because he is the only one that had the faith to take a step of faith and get out of the boat. If you want to talk about failing in faith, consider this. Why did the other 11 disciples follow people out of the boat? Did they not have the faith they could do it? One final story about this point with Peter is if we look at verses 28 and 29 again. Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. Peter walking on the water wasn't Jesus' idea. Jesus didn't say, "Peter, get out of the boat and I will let you walk on the water." That actually would have required less faith to trust a direct command from Jesus. This was all Peter's idea. Peter had the faith to suggest the idea and step out of the boat, knowing that once on the water, Jesus would take care of him. Now, what gave Peter the crazy idea that he could walk on water? I suspect God implanted the idea in his head, just like he implants ideas in our head. The key is to be listening for it, and when you hear that voice, trust it and follow it. Peter easily could have had that thought and dismissed it as a crazy idea and stayed in the boat. But Peter followed the call by taking the step of faith and getting out of the boat. Let's rewind a bit to the Old Testament to another story of a step of faith. The Israelites are coming to the end of their 40 years in the desert. Joshua has taken over command of the Israelites from Moses. Standing between the Israelites and the Promised Land is the Jordan River. Now, has anybody seen the Jordan River in person? A few of you. Okay.
I swam in it.
There you go. Dan swam in it. Well, if you visit Israel now, the Jordan River is a relatively peaceful and calm river. But that's because Israel has built a hydroelectric dam on it. Back in biblical times, it was a pretty fast-moving and wild river, especially during the flood season. Now, as we pick up this story, it is flood season when Israel is ready to cross the Jordan. And Joshua has received instructions directly from God about how this crossing is to take place. He explains it beginning in Joshua chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. The priest will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. As soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed onto the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Now, if you are ever in a situation to form a town, I highly recommend the name Adam instead of Zerethan. It's just a much, much, much better name. In all seriousness, I do find some irony. In the beginning of this journey from Egypt, God parted the Red Sea, and now the journey ends with the parting of the Jordan River. But there is a big difference in the amount of faith required in each step. So if we take a look at Exodus 14 for the story of the Red Sea, beginning in verse 21, then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. So you'll notice here, the Lord parts the Red Sea, then the Israelites begin to cross. But if we go back to Joshua for the crossing of the Jordan in verse 15, it was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away. So here at the end of the journey, the water doesn't part until the priest puts their foot in the water. The priest had to take the step of faith first. At the beginning of their journey, God made the first move. At the end of their journey, God expects their faith to have grown, so he requires them to make the first move. Moses' Israelites had it easy. The water was already parted. Joshua's Israelites, especially the priest in the front, had to take the step first and wait for the Lord to act. Now there were 12 priests, one from each tribe, carrying the ark. Now let's be honest with each other. If you're one of the priests assigned to carry the ark, and it's your turn to be in the front, you have to be the first one in the water. How many of you are turning to your buddy and saying, hey, Kevin, I know it's my turn to be in the front, but can you be in front? And we'll switch spots just for today, right? Is that okay? Now, fortunately, the Israeli priest had the faith to take the step and step into the Jordan River. The timing between the Red Sea and the Jordan River crossing demonstrates God expects us to continually grow in our faith. At the beginning of our faith journey, he may make the first move and allow you to go through the Red Sea after it's parted. Other times, he's going to wait for you to take the first step. So what step might God be asking you to take next in your faith? There's an old dad joke. How do you eat an elephant? Any of the dads know the answer? One bite at a time. I heard it from somebody back there. Yep. I would love to be one of those people that seems to have the whole Bible memorized. Ever meet somebody like this? No matter the situation, they can pull a memory verse out of their memory and it fits the situation. I'm not there yet. You know how I find my Bible verses? I've got a slide. I asked Dr. Google. Anybody else do this? The key verse from my last sermon when I spoke in August is 2 Timothy 4:7. I always knew the verse, I kept forgetting the reference, so I finally put it on my phone case so I remember the reference. So is asking Dr. Google, what is a good Bible verse for, going to help me learn the Bible? No, of course not. But what if I actually created some breathing room to take the time to read the Bible every day? Reading one verse at a time, one chapter at a time, bite by bite, eating the elephant. St. Francis of Assisi was a tremendous Christian priest in the 1200s. One of the many sayings he is known for is, start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible. So what is your impossible? What is the first step you can take towards it? Has God already parted the water for you, or is he waiting for you to take the first step? Peter walking on the water was impossible. The priest crossing a dry riverbed in the middle of a flood was impossible. What is our impossible? Me starting to read the Bible every day to know it better. You starting to do fill in the blank in your life. Is it reading the Bible every day? Is it praying every day? Let's do what's necessary. Create the breathing room. Do what's possible. Can you commit to doing it just this week? Just this week. But next week, do it again for 1 week. 1 week at a time. Bite by bite, eat the elephant. Take the first step into the water and see what God does. And your step doesn't have to be something big. Maybe it's just a small step, using the breathing room Pastor Davis talked about to get closer to God. Are these 14-day reading plans that we've had in the handout all this year, is that too intimidating for you? Did you know Philemon is the smallest book of the Bible? It's a total of 25 verses in the entire book. Could you commit to reading that book of Philemon this week? Or maybe use your Bible app to find a 3-day reading plan to finish this week. And then maybe next week, a 4-day reading plan. And the week after that, 5. Just keep doing what's possible, 1 week at a time, 1 bite at a time. What if you need to pray more? Can you commit to praying for this church 3 times this week? Or maybe join the Wednesday night prayer group. What is your impossible? If you've never taken the step of faith, your first step is to accept him and allow him to be your Savior. Would you do that today if you haven't taken that step? Any one of the staff or elders, Dave, Dan, myself, Dwight is working because he found out I'm preaching today, so he's not here. We are here to help you. Just come up to us after the service and we'd be more than happy to help you take that first step. How could your life be different if you take that step? If I read the Bible more, I'll have a better understanding of it and be more in tune with God's plans and desires for my life. Like I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this college degree once I get it, but I know I'm being prepared for something. What would happen if you took your first step of faith, big or small? Take a minute to picture what your life could be like. What could you do differently, but you've been afraid to take that first step? What is the elephant in front of you that you haven't taken the first bite of because eating it seems impossible? Spend some time this week in some breathing room, praying about it and asking God for help in deciding what you can do this week to get started. Now, if taking the step alone seems terrifying, bring along a friend. Laura has been incredibly supportive from the minute I said, kind of out of the blue, I think I need to go back to school. Pastor Dave has been a mentor for me and been very supportive as well. Behind the scenes, it's been very helpful when I was looking at different schools and different career or college tracks. We've talked over some of the coursework, and of course, he's invited me up here to preach again. Is there someone in your life you could take the journey with? Someone to check on you, encourage you, and motivate you to keep going? Peter walked on the water towards Jesus, and then he started to sink. Jesus grabbed his hand and pulled him back up. Sheila has mentioned several times, and this was in the script before she even talked today, about starting this coffee shop in Bainbridge. And she has numerous people coming alongside her to help. So who in your life can be that person? Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a friend. But if the step of faith you are called to take seems too big for one person, bring along a friend and take the step together. When the Ark of the Covenant crossed the Jordan, there were 12 priests carrying it, not just one, who went into the water alone. So don't be afraid to go on this journey together with somebody else. 2 more verses quickly. Romans 8:31. If God is with us, who can be against us? If God is with you when you take the step, do you think anything standing in your way has a chance? And then Jeremiah 29:11 and 12. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. Notice in verse 12, we are called to call upon him, and he will listen. But it is a two-way street of communication. As we call upon him, we have to be ready and willing and listening for his answer. And be willing to take that step of faith when he calls you to step out of the boat and onto the water, or off dry land and into a flooded wild river. Maybe he's been calling you, but you haven't taken the step. Maybe this is the week you finally do. If he hasn't called you yet, be ready, because he has a plan for your life that may require action from you sooner or later. You may feel a call to do something small, or maybe it's something big and outside the box. So crazy it can't possibly be God actually telling you to do it. So let me tell you this, nothing is as crazy as Peter walking on the water, or the Ark of the Covenant crossing the Jordan River on dry land in the middle of a flood, or God telling a 39-year-old financial advisor with 2 teenage kids to go back to college to get a biblical degree. Trust in God, and when the phone rings, answer it and take the next step. So I want to end with this quote from President Franklin Roosevelt. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Let us move forward with a strong and active faith. Don't let your own doubts, whatever they may be what stops you. Let this be the week we take the first or next step in our faith and see where God can take you if you have that strong and active faith. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this church and this congregation. I just pray for where we are all in different places in our journey in our life. I just pray for those that you've been calling or waiting for them to take the next step. I just pray that this is the week that they find the courage and the strength to take that next step in whatever you are calling them to do. We're all on our own journey in different areas, and we have different calls. So whether it's something big or something small, I just pray that we as a church are in tune with listening to you, to what you have to say, so that we can live out the plans that you have for us. Just pray for our continued health of everybody in this church in the middle of this pandemic. Just be with this church as we continue to grow. Pray all these things in your name. Amen.